Megan Sapp Nelson, and I am an associate professor of library science in Purdue University Libraries, and I'm a member of this team. Our PI is Sung Yoon Lee, and she sends her greetings from London, England, where she's currently on sabbatical. And Satish Ukasuri sends his greetings from China, where he's currently on research leave. So we're currently all over the world. Some of the additional team members are over here, and many of them will be hopping up to participate in this presentation. But Rosie Clausen and Justin Seipel, our wonderful graduate student, Arif Sadri, and Daniel Kelly are here as well. And Daniel Aldrich is still continuing to participate, even though he is now at Northeastern University at Boston. So that is our team. And we are going to be starting today with a video. This video was compiled by a member of the Henryville, Indiana community. And this is the March 2nd, 2012 EF4 tornado that struck across the state, really. The damage path was about 80 miles long, but it particularly hit Henryville. It came up over a ridge, and it basically did a bullseye on the town. And if you don't know anything about the EF, the Enhanced Fujita Scale, in the words of Twister, it's all about how much the tornado eats. So it's all about how much damage it creates. So these are pictures that were taken by a local woman who was in town. And so she was able to gather the images in the immediate aftermath of the tornado. And so our research project is all about how do you deal in those first few hours. So you wake up the next day, and this is what you're seeing. And then what? The tornado struck at about 3:30 in the afternoon, just as school was letting out. There's actually a really scary video of a bus driver made a judgment call to return to the school because she felt unsafe in the bus, and they barely got there before the tornado struck, got the students inside, and here in about 10 seconds or so, you're going to see what happened to the bus. So the school was actually the first thing that was hit. The tornado came up over the hill and hit particularly the high school head on, completely destroyed the gym. And then as it went across the street, it took the school bus with it. And this was a school bus that literally pulled up just a few seconds before, and it was blown across the street into the diner right there, and that diner now is known as the bus stop. So we can pause the video and return to our slide deck. So our project is investigating how you recover in the aftermath of a tornado like that, or any major disaster, and what the interplay is between the physical infrastructure of a community and the social networks. How do you rely on a social network in order to make up for the lack of a physical network? So I'll be doing the introduction today and talking about our survey design. Rosie Clausen will come up and talk about the results of that survey and our model. She'll be discussing some of our initial policy recommendations. We have very preliminary data at this point. And then Justin Seipel will be coming up and talking about what it has been like to work as an interdisciplinary team. And then we'll be taking questions. So our research questions when we started out were the following. How does the interdependence of physical infrastructure and social networks influence the resilience of a community? And what policies around physical infrastructure and social networks will enhance community resilience and reduce economic loss and disasters? And this map at the bottom shows the path of the tornado as well as the deaths that happened as a result of this tornado. The tornado path started just to the north of New Pekin, which is here. Hit Henryville head-on as well as Maryville head-on. Maryville was heavily damaged as well, as was Chelsea. And it continued across the river into Kentucky at that point. But it also spawned other tornadoes that continued up into Ripley County as well. So there were actually two parts to our research. There's a qualitative and a quantitative part. The qualitative part I was actually responsible for, and those are interviews with disaster response specialists who were responding to the immediate response to the Henryville disaster. So these are individuals who have been trained in disaster response, and they are with Indiana Department of Homeland Security, they're with the Red Cross, they're with the United Way, they're with the agencies that you think of as coming into a disaster area in the immediate response. And we wanted to know what they observed about the physical networks and the social networks and what the importance of those things are. The second part of our research has to do with this survey. We sent out a survey questionnaire, and there are 7 parts to the survey: household address and tornado impact assessment, which allows us to identify what the specific level of damage and proximity to the disaster was. Their evacuation experience, their social network, so how many people did they know in the area, and their recovery experience, so are they recovered yet, and to what degree, their degree of connection within the community, and finally some demographics. So the upper left-hand corner shows the actual tornado path through southern Indiana, and the lower map shows the geolocations of the 3,666 addresses that received this survey from us. And these are our survey respondents. You'll notice that they are scattered along the tornado path. We received 392 respondents. And now I'm going to turn it over to Rosie to discuss our preliminary results.
Thank you, Meg. Good morning. I do want to stress these are some initial analyses. We've done some basic data analysis, enough to talk a little bit today, but we have a lot more to do, and I'll talk about that, what we're going to do going forward in just a minute. But our dependent variable that we're most interested in right now is the recovery time. And so we have a measure of individual level recovery time, and just the descriptive data is here. It ranges from less than 12 hours to 12 months or more is the far side. And so as you can see, most folks are clumped down at the end. Those last 3 bars, 1 month or more, 6 months or more, 12 months or more. So most folks are taking quite a bit of time to recover at the individual level. And so we're trying to explain, using both our understanding of the physical and the social, why it takes some folks longer to recover than others. And this is our conceptual model. It's a bit complicated visually, but it actually boils down to 4 real keys. Social capital, so we're arguing that folks who have stronger ties to their community, to others, greater levels of trust in government, are going to be the folks who are recovering more quickly. We're also looking at personal networks, social networks, how tied in people are to their neighbors, to friends, network size, network density. We're looking at recovery assistance. where are the folks getting help from in the aftermath of the storm. We ask about whether it was family and friends, neighbors, religious organizations, Red Cross, National Guard, these kinds of factors. And then we also have measures of the physical infrastructure, damage to houses, schools, hospitals, these kinds of things. And we have demographic variables as well. And we're trying to explain then the individual level recovery time, but we also have measures of community level recovery time. And we haven't done analysis on that yet. So far we've focused on the individual level. But this conceptual model really puts the focus on both the social and the physical when you're thinking about recovery. And so we have some data analysis, but instead of putting up a bunch of tables, we've just summarized some key findings in the text. And one thing that probably isn't surprising at all is that elderly population takes longer to recover. So even controlling for all kinds of other social factors, physical factors, that demographic characteristic of being older takes longer to recover. If a family has more family members, it takes longer to recover. More time spent in the community, then you recover more quickly. And so from these data points here, we're already thinking about what policy recommendations we might come up with when you think about the elderly. Perhaps disaster recovery specialists need to develop programs that might specifically be geared towards the elderly, both in preparation for a disaster, but post-disaster as well, have plans in place that are specifically geared towards elderly. Also, in terms of folks who have lived there in the community longer are able to recover more quickly. So this is something, again, where communities can prepare and think about, okay, if we have a transient population, migrant population, then we need to think ahead of time about what kinds of resources we need to have in place so that those individuals are able to have the support they need if a disaster were to occur. We also found that people from Henryville were taking longer to recover. Part of that is just that Henryville got hit so hard, but we're also trying to separate out if there's other factors there that deal with community differences. If there was damage to the house and vehicle, damage to electric transmission, that leads to longer recovery time. Damage to landlines, shorter recovery time. Families and friends, those who had the connections, those who had that social capital with families, friends, neighbors, they were recovering more quickly. And so again, understanding how that process happened, so even controlling for what was happening with the physical infrastructure, those who had stronger ties to families, friends, neighbors were able to recover more quickly. So that also can lead us to think about policy prescriptions that we might put forward of how communities can prepare for natural disasters, that communities that are strong, that have these strong social ties, those are the ones that are going to be able to come back more quickly, we would argue. We also looked at those who were getting assistance from American Red Cross, charitable organizations, local law enforcement, and there it took some longer time to recover. Now, part of what might be happening is that those who are hit hardest were seeking out these kinds of resources, but we're trying to figure out, how can we control for certain things so we can isolate what that impact is. And for those who got assistance from National Guard, they were able to recover more quickly. So in this initial analysis, we're kind of taking these different strands, the social, the physical, and looking at them in a multivariate model, but still looking at them separately. And part of what we want to do going forward is thinking about how these are interacting with one another and trying to understand the interactions between the physical and the social. And I am going to turn it to Justin to talk about the multidisciplinary effort.
Thank you. So we were asked to share what it has been like to work as a team. And so I have a couple observations here. One of those is that we found pretty quickly that it was helpful for some of the team members to have had some past experience working as a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary team. So it already gave us some practices and some shared understanding that we could immediately start using on this project. However, the other observation is that these newer, more innovative and deeper interdisciplinary things that we expect to come out take more time. And some of the things that are at the nature of that are things like finding a common language that we're all understanding, that we all feel is suitable for our various disciplines. And the time scale of that, it's kind of interesting because our meetings may have other things in between. We go off and we go and we do other things in between meetings. One of the time scales is to try to find that language again almost every time we're meeting. And then, of course, there's the longer time scale of the duration of the project. Another observation is finding a common methodology. And again, one of the issues is, can we find not only something that we're going to be happy with just for this team project, but also something that we're all comfortable with for our various disciplines when we go, so to speak, home to our discipline and share. And again, it's expected that some of the most innovative interdisciplinary things are in some sense going to emerge after there's a process of practicing and having lots of practice. And that's it for the observations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Great job. I was wondering if you could provide a little more direction on how you define recovery, and given that's kind of a matter of degree, maybe more than a binary phenomenon. And also, could you mention maybe the impact of insurance in some of this? Because I imagine there were some delays related to that.
So recovery for our survey was actually defined in the survey, and we don't actually have that language in front of us. Yeah. And it says personal properties like your house, vehicle, so completely recover. So we were trying to get people back to status quo prior to the tornado in terms of our definition of recovery. So that was the definition for the purpose of the survey. Now, in terms of the interviews that I was doing with the disaster response specialists, recovery has a different definition, because recovery, there's response and then there's recovery, and it's a two-phase process. And recovery usually begins about 2 weeks after the disaster. So there's immediate response, which is usually get the gas line turned off, get the electricity turned off, get the electricity lines repaired, get the roads opened, and then your recovery can begin. And then it's a process that takes multiple years, and usually there is a recovery committee that is in conjunction with a nonprofit organization and local individuals. And so recovery there has a different definition than recovery in the survey here. And so our interview has a different definition of recovery than the survey instrument. And then, do you want to redress? And insurance was included in the household survey. This is Sadri.
Sadri is our expert on the data analysis.
So, because of the I mean, the length of the survey, we just asked people that what are the physical entities that they got help from, and private insurance companies was one of them, and they said that whether they have received help from private insurance companies or not. And we kind of test like people who received help, how faster they're recovering as compared to those who did not receive help from private insurance companies. And so this is a very limited information that we have in the survey.
Your project is covering recovery from a natural disaster. Have you factored in what would be involved recovering from a whole spectrum of human-caused disasters such as cyber attack, mass crime, terrorist assault, breakdown of civil order, all the way up to weapons of mass destruction attack?
So this is just a pilot project, and we hope to eventually go for further grants, but for this particular grant, no, we haven't considered anything beyond the scope of the March 2nd, 2012 severe storm disaster.
Thanks for your analysis. I lived in a town that was struck by an F5 tornado in 1998 in Minnesota, and I want to push you on the recovery thing to look at mental health long term. And I would also encourage you, I know this is a pilot, but to look at communities from before 2012. One of the things we noticed in our town was our health insurance rates skyrocketed 4 to 5 years after the tornado hit because people were availing themselves, fortunately, but they were availing themselves at a much higher rate for mental health care. And also some kinds of physical health care that it wasn't, oh, you threw your back out in the tornado, but it's 3 years later your body is so trammeled by the trauma that you threw your back out. And so, our community, I would say, recovered physically long before it recovered emotionally and mentally. And to me, the social networks were critical in that piece. And I'd encourage you to go there for future work.
One of our investigators, Daniel Aldrich, who's at Northeastern in Boston, has done a lot of research in the tsunami in Japan and in Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, and that's one of the factors that he has considered. So again, that piece is not for here in this project, but for future projects that we're moving forward with, we, I think, do want to factor that in.
So really interesting project. Thanks for the multidisciplinary presentation as well. It's impressive. So I guess I want to reverse time spans the other direction, because I think you said at the beginning that you were focusing on what happens in the first few hours after a disaster, but this survey seems to be really not necessarily focusing on those first few hours. So I would invite you to talk a little bit more about whether you think those first few hours are especially critical in recovery, or you're thinking that this much wider range of factors, which may or may not have a lot to do with what happens in the first few hours, is really important in predicting recovery.
So actually, the qualitative data that we gathered is representative of the first few hours, and the quantitative data is representative of everything after that, out to the present time. So in the qualitative data, what we're hearing from are people who witnessed they were maybe on the ground. The person who was there the fastest was there by 6 o'clock in the evening, and the tornado struck at 3:30. So it wasn't there immediately, but pretty close. And so what we have there are a series of interviews with individuals who are witnessing the recovery, not the recovery, we were witnessing the response within the first few hours. The interesting thing about the social network in the response period of the first few hours is that it was primarily about pre-existing social networks between voluntary organizations active in disaster, as well as individuals' ties within government and non-governmental organizations. So there were a lot of favors being called out at that point. So an example that came up was that a Samaritan's Purse hospital truck showed up because there is a pre-existing agreement between Iowa and Indiana VOADs that if there's a major disaster in Indiana, Iowa will show up. And if there is a major disaster in Iowa, Indiana will show up. There doesn't have to be a phone call, it just happens. That's a social network that is in existence before the disaster that is made use of. And there's no communication needed about it. So, hey, a hospital just shows up and they wiggle themselves into a parking lot and set up within 10 hours of the disaster. So that's the sort of social networks that were witnessed in the immediate recovery that showed up in the qualitative data. That's not what we were measuring in the quantitative data of the surveys.
You could also look at who was touched by a responder within the first 3 hours versus it took 12 hours, right, for a responder to get to them, and whether that even matters, right? Because presumably you think it does matter. Maybe.
Well, the way the survey was designed, it would be very hard to track that.
Yeah, I don't think we have the right data for that, unfortunately. Yeah. But in our bigger project that we're going to do.
So I just want to go back to the one about the mental health, because it occurred to me that, you know, some people are emotionally more resilient than others just naturally. And yeah, it probably isn't in your research, but it's just sort of a curiosity that I think would be interesting, maybe in follow-up, if people are even reliable to be able to evaluate themselves or their family and friends, you know, on sort of emotional resilience, and how do you sort of tap into those who are more emotionally resilient and sort of rise to the leadership in the recovery process?
We don't have any. Yeah, so on our own survey, on this survey, we do not have any of those measures. But I think this is really important, and certainly going forward, it's something we'll think about and try to incorporate. I mean, this is one of those practical issues of doing the multidisciplinary work of, you know, we have a set of questions that the engineers want on there, and then a set of questions that the social scientists want on there. And, you know, we had a very long survey at first, 3 times what we ended up with. And so we went through and forced everyone to cut. And so, you know, we ended up with still a multi-page survey, but I think this is really important going forward. And our response rate was not great for the mail survey. We sent out the survey, we sent out an initial letter kind of telling people it was coming, then we sent out the survey, and then we sent 2 postcard follow-ups. And still, you know, the response rate, it wasn't great, and so that's also something we need to think about going forward, is how we can up that participation in the survey.
Okay, we have time for one last question here.
So it seems to me your recovery time would be pretty directly related to how much personal property you had damaged, assuming that physically you personally are right. That, you know, if all you'd lost was your electrical line, that, you know, you're talking maybe a week or so. But if you lost your whole house, so I don't see that in your discussion or in your survey question. Did you gather that data?
Yeah, actually, in the first part of the survey, actually, who has the clicker? Sorry. So if you look at the line here, we know by the address where they are relative to the tornado's path. So part of this is that we know the geolocations of the responses. So that's one aspect that we're able to do, is we're able to not precisely know like a dollar amount of damage. We didn't ask that. But what we do know is we know a proximity to the damage path. So, but that's not in the data analysis yet. That's going to be down the road.
Thank you very much.